You can introduce yourself in the chat box, and during the session, if you have any queries, you can just put them down in the chat box and I will take it from there. I'm super excited for this amazing conversation we are going to have today on labor laws, codes 2020, and how these provisions will impact working women in India. So on September 23, 2020, the government passed three labor code bills, the Industrial Relations Code 2020, the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code 2020, and the Code for Social Security. Now, they merged some 24 remaining central labor laws, giving the country these four new labor codes. So today we have a superwoman with us and an incredible labor law practitioner, Neha Koshy. Now, she's an independent lawyer based out of New Delhi, and she's also the founder of Ladi Foundation, which is working on resolving gaps in female financial inclusion in India. She has also previously worked with 𝗟R𝗯ance Mangaldas and HSB Partners. Very recently, she has also penned a book on understanding workplace laws for women in India. Without further ado, let's understand from her what are the major changes that have been brought by these three codes and how will they impact working women. Over to you, ma'am.
Hi, Vanita. Thank you so much. I just have one clarification, which is probably not showing on my LinkedIn, is that I'm an in-house counsel now. And yeah, so I recently, I think one of the reasons why I've come on the panel is because of this book that I had the chance to write. And that book covers the new labor codes. What I do is over this session, I would cover what are the changes that are brought about with respect to the labor codes with respect to women's participation at work. So if I can share my screen, I'll just cover what the labor code, what I'll be doing over my presentation. Yeah. I'll mainly be covering 5 aspects. First, a small bit on the background. Then I'd go on to maternity leave and what are the changes that the labor code brought about. Then Equal Remuneration Act that existed and what are the provisions and how the changes that came about in that. Occupational safety and what are the changes that the labor code brought about. And also throughout this, I'd be going through compliance for employers. I think Vanita wants to say something to me.
Yes, ma'am, the screen is not visible entirely. I mean, I can only see a small bar. So
okay,
if you
let me just do that.
Again, it's just the bar, I believe.
It's just a bar?
Yeah.
Let me then just quit it and then start again.
Yes.
I hope this works now. Can you see my screen?
Yes, perfect. Yes.
Okay. Just like I said, 4 major parts, a background, maternity leave, equal remuneration, occupational safety, and then one part where we go over the compliances for employers and organizations, basically. So the changes with respect to the labor codes, while to us, it may seem that it was sudden, and we may think that, oh, lawmakers are just bringing about changes within 3 days. Like if you see the Social Security Code, the Code on Industrial Relations, the Code on Wages, they were all literally passed in 3 days. But actually, that's not the case. It's been around 20 years where there have been a lot of deliberations and a lot of discussions around this. I think industry leaders, a lot of businesses have asked that, let's simplify all the labor laws and bring it together. In fact, the 2003 National Commission on Labor actually suggested this in its report. However, it was only in 2019 that the Ministry of Labor introduced 4 bills to consolidate around 29 central labor laws. And they were, like Vanita said in the beginning, they were in 4 major bills, which was the Bill on Industrial Relations, the Code on Wages, the Social Security Code, the occupational safety code, and a code on working conditions. So, so the code on wages here, it's important to note, was passed in 2019. But however, for the other codes, a standing committee was appointed, which submitted its report. And finally, in 2020, September 23rd, the 4 labor codes were passed. So, so this is basically how the legislations were introduced and then passed quickly. But we have to remember that there were multiple committees. There were around 2 committees already working on it. There were a lot of deliberations, and then it was passed. So, like I said in the beginning, I'll be talking about maternity benefits. The maternity benefit provisions are now covered under the Code on Social Security 2020. This code also includes provisions on provident fund, state insurance, employees' compensation for workmen's accidents. It's like encompassing all provisions from all those separate acts earlier. They've brought it under one act, and it's the Code on Social Security. The provisions related to maternity benefit have now been covered under Section 59 to Section 72 of the code. It's not a separate act, it's just in one code. And they've literally just, compressed all the provisions of the Maternity Act and then put it in the code. Mostly with respect to maternity benefit, the provisions mirror the 1961 Act, the act which was amended later, and also brings in the 2017 amendments also. So it's literally they've just mirrored the act and put it in the code. The compliances, let me go over what are the compliances under the code. The maternity benefit, the Code on Social Security prescribes that the provisions for maternity benefit have now to be provided if your establishment has 10 or more employees. Here, it's important to note that it's not 10 or more women, it's 10 or more employees. So if you're just one woman in an establishment with 10 people, then you have to comply and provide maternity benefit. It's important to note that regarding 𝗖𝗍, earlier under the Maternity Benefit Act, if an employee was getting benefits through an 𝗖𝗍 fund, then they wouldn't be eligible to an organization's maternity benefit. But however, now they've clearly specified in the Code of Wages that the 𝗖𝗍 benefit will only apply if it is below the wage limit prescribed by the 𝗖𝗍 fund. So if an employee draws wages higher than that limit, then they will be eligible for maternity benefit. It does not mean that if an organization is covered by the 𝗖𝗍 fund, then that person won't get maternity benefit under the organization. They have clearly come up with that demarcation now. Earlier definitions of employer continue. However, they've added in within an employer now includes a contractor or a legal representative of a deceased employer. Like before, maternity benefit was calculated was the average of wages of 3 months before the date that the female employee was absent. That is, if a female employee is taking maternity leave for say 8 months, then she would be eligible to maternity benefit, which is the average of the wages for the immediately 3 months before she started taking the maternity leave. That has stayed the same. However, the definition of wages now, they have excluded some factors, some components, such as incentive bonuses, overtime earnings, fines, contributions to pension, provident fund, and gratuity. Now, this earlier, the definition of wages was all encompassing, but now they've started making certain aspects which are not covered within maternity, within the definition of wages for maternity benefit. This probably is because the Code on Social Security has one definition for wages, which applies for provident fund, which applies for 𝗖𝗍, applies for workplace accidents, workplace compensation of accidents. So that's why there is this confusion that why is the definition for maternity benefit also, I mean, why isn't there any, why do they have these exclusions? Maybe that is something that we'll see that will change in the rules when they actually get passed. Like before, maternity leave, a female employee was entitled to 26 weeks under the code, where 8 weeks may be availed before delivery and 12 weeks if the employee has 2 or more children. It's very important to know that it's 2 or more children, not 2 or more pregnancies. So even if you've had a miscarriage the second time, but you didn't have children, you will still be eligible for the 26 weeks of maternity leave. The most important aspect is that the Maternity Benefit Act and the Code of Social Security prohibits organizations from employing women 6 weeks after the delivery. Now, this is very crucial for all organizations to follow. They should ensure that women after delivery get at least 6 months or 6 weeks of leave post the delivery. And a change that the Code of Wages brought about was regarding a medical bonus. The Maternity Benefit Act earlier provided for a medical bonus of 3,500 rupees and said that the maximum bonus that you can give, that an organization can give, is 20,000 rupees. But now the Code on Social Security did away with this ceiling of 20,000 rupees. Again, like the Maternity Benefit Act, now again, there's now leave for women who are adopting and women who are having children through surrogacy. There is a 12-week leave. But however, it's very important to remember that under the Maternity Benefit Act, if you're adopting, you will be only entitled to maternity benefit if your child is under 3 months age, which is very rare because it's actually difficult to adopt a child who's under 3 months of age because the process itself will take time. So this is probably something that we're expecting will change with the rules. Like the earlier provisions under the Maternity Benefit Act, creche facilities and nursing facilities have to be provided to female employees. However, now it's clearly written that creche facilities have to be provided where an organization has more than 50 people who are working. Again, it's important to remember that it's 50 people and not 50 women. So even if your organization has just 50 and you're the only woman, you still need to have a creche facility if you have a child. Again, the code also allows for organizations, understands that it's difficult for companies to provide creche facilities because it's expensive. So it's authorizing organizations to actually avail services from other creches and give mothers a discount. However, the rules have certain stipulations. The rules earlier had certain stipulations regarding how far this creche can be, how many breaks do you give women? And that's what we're expecting to see once the rules actually come for the Code on Social Security. Like the Maternity Benefit Act, under the Code on Social Security also, post-delivery work from home facilities can be availed by women. However, this requires the employer and employee to consent to such a facility. The employers are also bound to inform employees by placing rules in a prominent part of the organization. And also, they require to inform their employees electronically through email when they're at the beginning of their employment. So,
is this also applicable to unorganized sector or only limited to the organized sector?
So if you mean by organized, it's an establishment with a shops and establishment license, then yes, it applies to them as well. It's not just, if any organization or any establishment has a license, then they are required to comply with this. Even contractors. Now, if you have contract workers, they're also required to comply with this under the Code of Social Security. So we can actually see that the Code of Social Security is trying to extend the ambit of who receives maternity leave, which is a great thing on their part.
Also, what about like freelancers and platform workers? That is also something very upcoming these days. So does the court take that also in its ambit?
Unfortunately, while in other court, which is a code, which is I think the code on wages covers freelance workers and gig workers particularly, the maternity code and social security unfortunately does not apply to them. Yeah, we hope that that changes with respect to, yeah. So let me move on to the next part of my presentation, which is on equal remuneration. So earlier we had an Equal Remunerations Act, which was at least 75 years old, and at least, yeah, I mean it's been there for a very long time, and there were hardly any amendments to it. The Code on Wages, which was passed in 2019, incidentally, it brought within its ambit the entire gamut of laws regarding wages. So it covered equal wages, it covered minimum wages, it covered payment of bonus. However, it's important to note that the rules yet have not been notified. So this is very contentious. And also with respect to minimum wages, one needs to know that each state has a separate notification regarding what would be the minimum wages. So that is something that we are expecting now. Sections 3 and 4 of the Code of Wages covers provisions regarding equal wages for equal work. Now, if you've read the Code of the Equal Work for Equal Remuneration Act, it had a term that there should be no discrimination amongst people on the basis of gender if work is performed of the same or similar nature. Right. Now, the Code of Wages has also taken in the same concept and covered, prohibited any discrimination, whether at the time of employment or at the time of deciding wages, on if the work performed is same or similar in nature. Now, the earlier code, the Code of Wages also covers employer, who's defined as a person having an ultimate control over the affairs, or a manager who's managing the affairs of the establishment. Like the maternity benefit, like the Code on Social Security, this code also covers contractors. So this is a trend that we are seeing with the new labor codes, that they're trying to cover contractors who are not earlier covered, and who also are, big employers in our country, if you see, with respect to a lot of jobs. So employee definition is now broadened. It covers workers across skill and functional levels. So it can be unskilled, skilled workers, it can be, managerial workers, it can be supervisors. So the definition under the Code of Wages is now become a lot more encompassing. Then, however, since this is the one code that covers, laws for minimum wages, bonus, gratuity, the definition of wages under that is applicable to the other laws also is applicable to the provisions for equal remuneration. So while this I think it makes, it consolidates all the definitions, but maybe somewhere the rules might want to create exceptions for certain laws and certain, different areas. So that is something that the government can think of. Like the Code of Wages, discrimination is prohibited at the time of recruitment and at the time of determination of wages. Yeah. So let me just, the organizations with respect to the code of wages have to ensure that there is no discrimination on grounds of gender if the work is same or similar in nature. Reduction of wages is prohibited by organizations. Employers are prohibited to discriminate during recruitment also. Further, organizations have to maintain registers. This is a common labor law compliance. And under the Code of Wages also, for equal remuneration, they are required to ensure that the registers are maintained. Then notices for equal work and equal remuneration have to be displayed in prominent locations in the establishment. Okay. So that's about equal work and equal remuneration. Once I'm done with this, these slides, I will go over again over the compliances so that, it's clearer for people. So Garima, any questions on this? Sorry, Vanita, any questions on this? Sir?
So by far, we understand that there have been provisions made with respect to maternity benefits. Also, to create equitable conditions for women, are we looking at creating provisions on menstrual leave as well? Is that something that the code is talking about? Or you think that, maybe it will come out in the rules, something like that, probably?
So what we have seen is, we've seen a couple of organizations in India. I can recall Zomato, for example, that gave its employees 10 days of menstrual leave in a year. And that we thought was an excellent example for other organizations to follow. However, statutorily, there is no such provision which gives women menstrual leave. But given that complications at the time of menstruation is becoming very prevalent now, and we are seeing a lot of women actually having a tough time, I think that HR bodies and HR of organizations should definitely consider giving this leave, especially with women who have conditions like endometriosis or PCOD, when they're actually having a difficult time during their periods, and they should definitely have a policy for this. There is nothing to be embarrassed, if there were men menstruating, then I'm sure there would be a leave policy.
Right.
So right now, I don't see any conversations around this with respect, from politicians or lawmakers, but that would be an excellent reform.
Right. Also, since I understand that these amendments are probably also made to ensure that women are able to participate better in the workforce, right? So if you can pinpoint that,
Hello?
Hi.
I just lost you for a second.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was talking about that since these amendments have been introduced from a perspective of also including women participation in the workforce, if we can highlight or pinpoint that, these specific things have been done to ensure better participation of women in the workforce to create more equality. If there is something like that that's been done through these codes.
Yeah. So I think the next slide where I'm going to talk about, that has a measure which has which pointedly applies for which is to include greater participation of women in the workforce, which is in provisions for occupational safety. So one of the biggest changes that the labor code brought about for women is that earlier restrictions on the employment of women between 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. There were a lot of restrictions that prohibited women from working at that time, primarily because of related to their safety. Now, however, those restrictions have been done away with. And we are hoping that the law, the rules actually, I mean, from whatever articles I read about this, it appears that the rules are also going to include having creche facilities for women when they are working from 7 p.m. to 6 a.m., which, I mean, kind of closes that loop and allows women, yeah, to have their kids. I mean, what is the point of working if your kids have to, if you're having to deal with that, of course. So it may, I mean, it's actually linking it and providing creche facilities also at that time. Uh, so I mean, I'm sorry. Of course, there is definitely the last thing I said. Of course, I mean, the having creche facilities with women who are working overtime will definitely help, and help ease the stress that women go through when they work at night and when they work overtime. So, going over the provisions of occupational safety. Now, occupational safety, the code, basically covers what was earlier covered under the Factories Act of 1948. It repealed the act, and the Factories Act, if you remember, covered all sorts of factories, whether it is even if you have a small a small medium enterprise in your home. It even covered that, provided they employed a certain number of people. So under the occupational safety code now, a factory is a premise where a manufacturing process is carried out and which employs 20 people if there's no power involved. However, if there's power involved and it employs more than 40 people, then it will be called a factory. And then they would have to comply with the provisions of the occupational safety code. A worker now under the occupational safety code encompasses all people, whether they're employed for skilled work, unskilled work, technical, operational, clerical, or supervisory work. In addition to permitting women in addition to removing the restrictions that prohibited women from working from 7 p.m. to 6 a.m., the Occupational Safety Code also provides, specifies and clarifies that creche facilities have to be provided. Earlier, this was only applicable for organizations where women had children under 6 years and where an organization that had 50 or more people. And now they have reduced that limit to 30 people. And so that's another change, which will bring in more women to the workforce. Right. They've also, like the Maternity Benefit Act, the Occupational Safety Code prescribes that these creche facilities can be availed with, private creche facilities, with NGOs. In fact, it's important to note that the state and the central government also provide creche facilities. The Ministry of Women and Child Welfare has released guidelines for each district to have a creche facility. So a factory can actually align with that creche facility and ensure that, provide their employees access to that. Earlier, it's also another thing that the factories, the Occupational Safety Code did away with was restrictions on women's participation in certain processes. Now, this becomes a bit technical, but earlier, women were not allowed to participate in processes such as cleaning and moving heavy machinery, certain types of transmission machinery, working in cotton presses, lifting and carrying weights beyond a certain limit. Right. Now, a lot of those restrictions are done away with. However, for the exact, the weights that women are now allowed to carry, exact definition of those weights will only be available in the rules which we are awaiting right now. So another change that the Factories Act brought about with respect to women is that that the Occupational Code brought about with respect to women is very important, is about the need for separate latrines and urinals for men and women employees. So earlier, the Factories Act had this, but it was not an obligation on the owner of the building to ensure this. But now they've made it obligatory for the owner of the premises also to be responsible for this and to ensure that the tenants have separate restrooms for men and women. So we hope that, all of this will percolate to have more women participate in the workforce, that all of these changes will actually benefit and will bring about more women to the workforce. And
What about
Vanitha, any questions?
yes, so what about sectors like if you talk about construction workers, or maybe where women are working on the farm field? So how do we also ensure that these people also have these basic rights, like specifically when we talk about having proper urinals and separate wash facilities? So how do we cater to women who are working at construction sites or farm fields?
So the occupational code technically applies to building and construction workers also. So it's covering what was earlier covered in a separate law. It is covering that as well. But the limit of 30 persons also needs to be met. Now, if you are a construction, if you're running this, then you need, if you have 30 or more women, then you need to ensure that you have separate latrines for men and women. Also, something that the code will help in ensuring compliance this time around is that the power for inspectors has been enhanced under the code. So they have a lot more powers than they earlier had with respect to investigation and inspection. And we feel that that might definitely help construction workers, especially, and that might actually promote compliance in the part of construction workers, especially.
Right. Yeah. Right. All right. And like we also spoke about that women, there is no particular shift time now. So let's say this will also make it more comfortable for women to opt as maybe for a night security guard position, or maybe if they have to be the driver for cab companies. So all of that. But then when we talk about this, another question that comes is, how are organizations taking care of the safety of women? I mean, largely that is also something that needs to be addressed. So how do you think the codes are taking care of that aspect?
So the codes right now that is a big flaw in the code, and that's a big criticism of the code, is that while you have in one hand permitted women, you have not actually provided or ensured that the organization should take XYZ steps, like ensure that they are able to reach their home and ensure that they're safe and secure. So this is something that I am an optimistic person, so I'm going to expect that will come about in the rules. So all we can do is actually wait and see if this is covered in the rules. If not, then it actually becomes a toothless law then for women, for sure.
Right. Like, for instance, if I have to opt for a shift where I'm required to go back at 3 o'clock in the night, I mean, I might do it, but then unless the company is providing me with a facility of a safe travel, I might not opt for it. Yes. So I think certain provision needs to come up on this perspective.
Yes, especially rules need to be clarified on, how will women be employed post 7 p.m. and, how are you going to manage that? How are you going to ensure? And we had seen, if under the Shops and Establishments Act in Karnataka, if I'm not wrong, there were rules that were prescribed for organizations to follow with respect to women who are working at night. Now, we are expecting something like this to be employed at a pan-India level. That will apply to factories at a pan-India level. So that's what is expected.
Right. We also have one question from the audience. This question is from Asri from Indonesia. They are a candidate, they are an advocate, and this theme really inspired them, giving them more strength. Now they have a question about menstrual leaves. there is a condition on one of the factory in their country. Labor who will be taking menstrual leave should bring doctor's statement, now, which is not easy for labor, who already felt not too fit to work, must come to the hospital and give back that doctor's statement to the factory at the same day. So they want to understand how is it in India. This is what they are stating about Indonesia. And
so in India, yeah, I mean it's really nice to know that 𝗪𝗯ance is reaching out to people in Indonesia, and thank you. I wouldn't have had this platform had it not been for 𝗪𝗯ance. But like I'd earlier mentioned, Vanita, is that in India, menstrual leave is not something that is provided under statute. Some organizations are providing for it, and from what I know, those organizations are providing for it without a requirement for a medical certificate. Mandating medical certificates to provide menstrual leave, it doesn't, I mean, I wouldn't say that it's very practical, because a lot of times, you might not get a certificate for it. Right. So in India, we don't have a law like this, but from what I know, organizations that are providing it do not require a medical certificate.
All right. Okay. I think now we can move on to the compliances aspect and understand what organization needs to do with respect to these 3 codes.
Just a second. Yeah.
There's also a very interesting example shared by Ajitesh. He says Tata Steel Limited has inducted first batch of female heavy earth moving machinery operation to work in all shifts of its iron ore mines recently. So I think there's a positive impact.
Yeah.
Also, are there any provisions being made to enhance participation from the transgender community? We've spoken about women, but are there anything specific for the transgender community as well in any of these codes?
Okay, so there was a Supreme Court judgment in 2017, I think, where equal remuneration, equal work for equal remuneration was also applied. The term gender was, it also included the third gender. And the Supreme Court said that equal work for equal remuneration should also be applicable for transgenders. However, we assume that the term gender right now also includes the third gender. And it's not explicitly stated, but because of the judgment, we feel that the term will also apply to them.
Correct. So in future, you think there should also be provision made with respect to probably providing allowances or providing leaves when it comes to gender assignment surgery and all of that? Do you think it can be in future? Right now, nothing like that.
Yeah, I think that would be a great step forward for the transgender community. So I think that would be definitely welcome. Okay. So the compliance requirements, like I mentioned before, primarily revolve around informing employees. I think this is clear. They're about informing employees under maternity law. Like we said, it needs to be mentioned. The laws, the maternity benefits for employees need to be mentioned a prominent part of the organization. Preferably, employers should email their employees if they are using emails, and they should email the employees of the benefits that they can avail. Creche facilities, like I mentioned, under the Maternity Benefit Act, organizations that have 50 or more employees are required to provide creche facilities. Again, Maternity Benefit Act applies to a large number of organizations as compared to the Occupational Safety Code, which applies to factories. So there is a different requirement for creches under that. Also, in organizations with more than women should also, in addition to creche facilities, women should also be given breaks around 4 visits to the creche, because without that, how they wouldn't be able to meet their children in the creche. Then these creche facilities can be provided in collaboration with other organizations. Additionally to the creche visits, Women Maternity Benefit Act or the Code of Social Security also specifies that women should be given 2 nursing breaks in a day. And like I mentioned, maternity benefit, which is the average of the wages, needs to be provided for women, and women should be provided up to 26 weeks of leave, paid leave, when they're undergoing their pregnancy. If they've undergone tubectomy, they'd be given 2 weeks leave. And if they're adopting children, or they have children through surrogacy, they must be provided with 12 weeks leave. Then again, yeah. Employment immediately after delivery, which is 6 weeks of delivery, should be prohibited. And employers should also ensure that pregnant women are not, made to take up labor which might interfere in their pregnancy. So something which involves labor, which involves long hours of standing or lifting very heavy weights, that is something that the Code of Social Security prohibits women from, employers from making the pregnant women in their organizations do. Again, pregnant women in their organizations and not all women.
Right.
Also, the medical bonus. Organizations are required to provide women with a medical bonus of 3,500. And as we saw before, this does not apply. The earlier limit of 20,000 rupees for medical bonus has been done away with, and now it's up to the organization to decide what they give as medical bonus to their to the women. Code of wages, the compliances. First is employers need to ensure wage parity between all genders. There is a prohibition, employers are prohibited to discriminate amongst employees on grounds of gender. So there's a prohibition of discrimination. There's a prohibition from reducing wages of any employee which might result in discrimination, or increasing wages of any employee which might result in any discrimination. Employers are prohibited to discriminate during recruitment and in conditions of employment on grounds of sex or for the work of same or similar nature. Like all other laws for wages, under the Code of Wages as well, register and muster roll of employees is required to be maintained. Wage slips have to be kept, and the employer should display in a prominent place an abstract of the code, wage rate of employees, day and night rate, and name and address of the inspector. So this is information that is required to be kept by organizations that are covered by the Code of Wages for their employees, and this should be kept in a prominent part of an organization. It can be, at the when you enter, or it can be at where people eat food. So one such prominent place where employees come, that's where these notices should be kept. Under the Factories Act, for women particularly, creche facilities are like we saw. Creche facilities have to be provided. Creche facilities may be suitably distanced, and if you're providing a creche facility outside the organization, it should be suitably distanced from the organization. So I think earlier there was a 100-meter restriction, but now we await what the rules will say about this. Then women can be employed now between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. However, the explicit consent of the female employee needs to be taken. Other conditions pertaining to safety and the holidays and working conditions need to be strictly observed by the employer. Then safeguards for the employment of women and children, specific operations need to be taken. Like we earlier mentioned, there were certain occupations that women are now allowed to take with respect to heavy machinery and cotton mills. However, when employers are now employing women, they need to ensure that they're taking sufficient safeguards for their employment when they're working there. So these are broadly the compliances that organizations have to take with respect to women under the code. So a detail of all of this is in our book that 𝗟𝗯ance and I made. The book lists down compliances for organizations. It also has a detailed list of what is the difference in the earlier act and how has the code changed it. So, we've got a sheet which lists down all the differences, even, word by word, sentence by sentence. You can see a table where you can see all the differences. And, this book, if you are an in-house counsel, it covers provisions for POSH, it covers provisions on maternity leave, equal wages, shops and establishment compliances. So this is a one-stop, compliance manual for organizations if you're employing women. So we strongly urge, my co-author 𝗟𝗯ance and I, we strongly urge you, if you run an organization or if you are in the HR team or legal team of an organization that employs women, then definitely this book is for you.
Also, I think this is very unique that's been written in India, because I remember that there are books on POSH, there are books on all these subjects, but I think nothing has written from a woman perspective, like what organization needs to entail when they're hiring women, particularly.
Yes.
Also,
so that's exactly.
Yeah, if you can also tell us more about the book, like how should we use this, and for like what are the different things that are covered in the book, and how we can actually use it in our daily practice.
Sure. I can actually, I have a PDF that I can run you by with the index and stuff. This, I was in fact referring to it before the webinar. So this book primarily covers, the law on sexual harassment at the first instance. So we have an important part of this is the annual compliance reporting mechanism. So this just clearly lists down what all you have to do as an organization if you want to if you are complying with POSH, which you should. And importantly, here we cover, the whole gambit. For maternity, we cover as to what, who does this apply to, who does the, code and social security apply to, what is prohibited, what is the benefits, what are the penalties for contravention, authorities, who are the authorities. Then we also have a very interesting section on frequently asked questions, which is just questions that we compiled from all over the internet. So we went through many HR forums, we looked through what are the questions that people are going through, we put responses to that. So that might probably just have answers to all your questions on maternity benefit. Then regarding, so this is regarding the code of wages. We've gone through, the important part here is the compliances for employers. We've also gone through who are the authorities that are appointed by the court, what is prohibition of discrimination, what are the important definitions under the code. For safety, occupational safety, we've covered, what are the penalties, again, like the earlier one. What are the restrictions on employment? How do creche facilities have to be provided? What are the, guidelines on that by different bodies? I think the Ministry of Women and Child Welfare also has a set of guidelines. We've covered that. Like earlier, we've also got a section on frequently asked questions, because a lot of questions come up on the implementation of these laws, and we've tried to cover that. Shops and establishments, we've gone through most of the states' shops and establishment regulations. We've compiled it. We've listed down what are the main compliances that are required to be done if you're an organization, one of those places. And also importantly, we've listed down a comparative table. So which has, which compares between the old laws and what was covered by the new code. So interestingly, when we were writing this book, suddenly in September, we got to know that the law changed. We were not really expecting it. So we had written the book with the earlier acts, and then the law changed, and then we rewrote it. So we thought at this point it's good to have a comparative table which basically compares between the two laws. So that's basically what the book covers. And if you guys would want to know anything more about the book, then just please ask questions, or you can just reach out to us on LinkedIn or Facebook, and we'd be happy to talk about the book or give you any information you need about the book.
This looks incredibly holistic. I mean, how the book has been created. If you can also share the link for ordering, I mean, that'll be very helpful for
Yes,
all of the attendees. If you
yes,
can.
I can do that. I will do that. This is the Amazon link. If you guys have any, if you guys are interested, then please go get it on Amazon or ask us any questions. We're available on LinkedIn. Isha and I are on LinkedIn. Just ask us questions and we'd be happy to answer it. And also, if you guys need anyone to speak to your HR or your in-house, or run sessions on labor laws for women, we are more than happy to do that. Just reach out to us on LinkedIn and we can discuss this.
That's very helpful, Neha. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this beautiful session.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks, Anika. I really thought the questions are very insightful. Thank you. Thank you for them.
It was a good learning experience. Like, we got to know so much about what's the current laws and what are the recent changes, and you explained them so well, specifically the part where you've illustrated that whether it's applicable on women or whether it's applicable the employee strength. So all those nuanced details were very important. Thank you so much, Neha.
Thank you. Thanks everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. If you have any doubts for ma'am, you can drop it in the chat box, and then we can just wrap up the session. Thank you, Vijayalakshmi. Delighted to be part of the session. All right.
Bye. Bye, Vanita.